Welcome to today's webinar titled Introduction to the Blended Retirement System. We are thrilled to have with us today Mr. Andrew Corso, Major Michael Odell, and Stuart Kaplan. Mr. Andrew Corso and Major Michael Odell work in the Office of Military Compensation Policy, the office charged with implementing the new retirement policy. Stuart Kaplan works for the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, the federal agency responsible for managing the TSP. Without further delay, I will turn things over to Major Odell.
Thank you very much, Stan, and a very good morning or good afternoon to wherever you're joining us around the world. Thanks for joining the Introduction to the Blended Retirement System. This is an opportunity for those of you that may have already taken the mandatory BRS opt-in course to have an opportunity to talk to subject matter experts about the blended retirement system and particular questions following under your circumstances. But before we begin, we're going to advance to the next slide here, and I need to read a disclaimer for Military OneSource. The appearance of hyperlinks does not constitute endorsement by the Department of Defense of this website or the information, products, or services contained herein. For other than authorized activities such as military exchanges and morale, welfare, and recreation sites, the Department of Defense does not exercise any editorial control over the information you may find at these locations. Such links are provided consistent with the stated purposes of this Department of Defense sponsored webinar. I will also add, for any of you participating in today's policy brief, this does not, I repeat again, this does not count as your mandatory blended retirement opt-in course training. This is a policy brief only with access to subject matter experts to answer your questions about the blended retirement system. You still are required to take the mandatory BRS opt-in course through either Joint Knowledge Online or your services learning management system, or a non-CAC enabled version through Military OneSource. If you do take the course through Military OneSource, please ensure that you turn in your training certificate to your training manager to get credit. Without further ado, we'll move on and begin the presentation, and let me turn it over to Mr. Andy Corso. Andy.
Thank you, Mike. This is Andy Corso, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone. As Mike said, the primary way to digest information about blended retirement, or at least the first way we encourage, is through the mandatory opt-in training. And the primary purpose of this discussion today is to get into some of the more detailed aspects of blended retirement transition, and also to answer your questions and answers. So we're going to make some assumptions about that most of the listeners in this conversation have a basic knowledge of BRS. We're going to skip some of the more broad discussions, or move quickly through them to give as much time as possible for questions. But as you can see on the slide, which many of you may have already seen before, but this is our general opening slide as to why the blended retirement system, and to compare the blended retirement system to the current legacy military retirement system. So the question is often asked, why are we transitioning to a new blended retirement system? The current retirement system is a good and effective system for those members who retire. And absolutely it is. But one of the things that when we contrast the current retirement system to blended retirement, we see is who it impacts. You'll see at the top of this slide, the legacy retirement system benefits 19% of the, on average, 19% of the population. Those are members who serve at least 20 years. It is what we call a cliff vested retirement system, meaning if you don't serve 20 years in the military, you don't receive a retirement benefit from the government. Blended retirement system is a way to expand the pool of individuals who are serving and receiving government retirement benefits as a result, because we believe everybody should be planning for retirement as early as possible. Under the blended retirement system, we're still going to have a defined benefit, and we'll talk about those details in a few minutes, similar to the legacy retirement system, but with a different multiplier. But what blended retirement does is it brings in government matching and automatic contributions to TSP that begin much earlier in a member's career, meaning that even if you don't serve for 20 years to receive the defined benefit, you're still going to receive government retirement contributions to your retirement through the form of TSP. And so there's some additional aspects of BRS we'll talk about in a second as well. But the bottom line statement on this slide is that approximately 85% of all service members will get retirement benefits from the government in exchange for their service, as opposed to the legacy retirement system, which benefit on average about 19% of service members. And that, you can see, is the primary difference and advantage of BRS collectively is that more people are going to be receiving government retirement benefits. That said, the Department of Defense, your services do not necessarily take a position on which is a better retirement system for an individual. For each individual, the comparison of the two systems is important. It's important to understand how one system or the other would impact you and to make a decision based on that. This is very much an individual decision, and we don't take a position on which is better. If we can move to the next slide, we'll get into a little bit more detail on who is actually affected by the blended retirement system.
Great, thanks, Andy. And so if you're on the call, I'm hoping that by now you know if you are affected or have the option about the blended retirement system. With just 74 days to go until the opt-in period opens for you to make that election decision. I think it's first and foremost important to point out that anyone that is currently wearing the uniform, so if you are in service as of December 31st, 2017, you were grandfathered under the legacy retirement system, which means the legacy retirement system is your retirement system. However, there are several members in the active duty, National Guard and Reserve that have an option to choose which retirement system to belong come January 2018. Now, it's important that if you do make that option to choose, you must physically make the option to choose the blended retirement system, as no one will be automatically moved to the blended retirement system. But let's talk about who might be eligible to opt into the blended retirement system. So if you see the orange color on your slide, the very first service member here, if you are over 12 years of service, or for the National Guard and Reserve, if you have more than 4,320 retirement points, as of December 31st, 2017, you were grandfathered under the legacy retirement system, and you unfortunately do not have an option to choose the new retirement system. Now, there is a huge pool of service members that we'll take a look at here now that's in the blue section on your slide. So if you are an active duty service member with less than 12 years of service as of December 31st, 2017, or you are in the National Guard or Reserve with less than 4,320 retirement points as of December 31st, 2017, you will have the option to choose which retirement system is right for you. So it's important to know if you are an opt-in eligible service member, if you are grandfathered under the system, or if you look at the green box on your slide, all new entrants into the uniformed services on and after January 1st, 2018, will be under the new retirement system. Now, there's a couple of other nuances out there. If you are in the individual ready reserve or the standby reserve, you are eligible to opt into the blended retirement system so long as you have fewer than 4,320 retirement points, but you must be in a paid status to do so. So if you happen to come onto a paid status in 2018, you will have the remainder of 2018 to opt into the blended retirement system if you so choose. Now, let's say you are in the IRR or standby reserve and you don't come in a paid status until 2019, 2020. You will be afforded 30 days to make an opt-in decision once you come on to a paid status, so long as you meet the basic eligibility rules of having less than 4,320 retirement points as of December 31st, 2017. Now, there are some folks that we know that are at the service academies, are in ROTC, or in the delayed entry program. If you have entered one of the service academies, signed your ROTC contract, or signed an enlistment contract for delayed entry prior to December 31st, 2017, the same rules that I just mentioned apply to you as well. If you graduate or enter service in 2018, you will be given the remainder of 2018 to opt in. Or if you graduate, say, 2019, 2020, 2021, maybe you're on the 5-year plan, 2022, and enter service, you will be given 30 days to make an opt-in decision if you want to remain with the legacy retirement system or opt into the blended retirement system. So that's the eligibility criteria for you to measure yourself to determine if you are eligible or have a choice on which retirement system is right for you. So now that we've talked a little bit about eligibility, we're going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk to our National Guard and Reserve folks specifically for just a quick moment. It's important to note that for opting into the blended retirement system, it is based on retirement points for the National Guard and Reserve retirement points, not years of service. So, for example, I am a National Guardsman on active duty right now. I have 14 years of service. However, I only have approximately 3,000 retirement points, which means I am eligible to make an opt-in decision if the blended retirement system is right for me. So for National Guard and Reserve, it's important to know your retirement points. Don't know how to get your retirement points? The slide that's up right now will instruct you on where to go. For the Army National Guard, you want to take a look at your IPRMS record. For the Air Force Reserve and their Air National Guard, you're going to go to the Air Force portal and log on to the virtual MPS, Military Personnel Flight System, and look for your records under what's called PCARS, which is your point accounting system. Okay, it's on the Air Force portal under virtual MPF. For the Army Reserve, you'll want to go to HRC and check out your record. And for the Marine Corps, you'll log on to MOL or Marine Online, and you'll take a look at your career retirement credit report. And for the Navy Reserve, you're going to go on to the annual retirement point record, ARPR, under your Navy.mil account. So that's where you're going to go if you're in the National Guard or Reserve. So at this point in time, hopefully you know if you're eligible and the decision that you have coming in 2018. So now let's take a look at some of the system's basics.
So there are four key components to the blended retirement system, and we're going to talk about each one of those separately. So I'll just cover them very briefly here. The defined benefit is the largest aspect of the blended retirement. And just like with the legacy retirement system, a member who serves at least 20 years will receive a defined benefit, which is monthly retired pay following the conclusion of their service. The difference between the legacy retirement system and the blended retirement system is the multiplier. Under the legacy retirement system, the multiplier was 2.5 times the years of service times your high 36-month average. Under the blended retirement system, the multiplier will be 2% times your years of service times the high 36-month average. So for example, if you serve for 20 years, your retired pay will be based on 2% times 20, which is 40%. 40% of your high 36-month average would be your retired pay beginning in the first month after your retirement. The rules for how to qualify for a retirement, who receives a retirement, and when do not change from the current system. For active duty, you still require 20 years of service, and retirement begins the month following when you retire and continues for the rest of your life. For a reserve or guard member who qualifies for a non-regular retirement, retired pay does not begin until age 60, or in many cases, that age can be reduced for certain qualifying service. The rules for when retired pay happens and who qualifies for it do not change. The only change under blended retirement is the difference in the multiplier from 2.5 to 2%. But unlike the current retirement system, the blended retirement system has a component called a defined contribution, or the Thrift Savings Plan. And we're going to talk a lot more in depth about that in a moment with the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, so I will skip over that for the moment, but that's going to be a major aspect of BRS that differs from the legacy system. Two other components of BRS that we want to talk about in the course of this conversation are continuation pay and the lump sum. Continuation pay is a mid-career bonus that members covered under the blended retirement system will receive in exchange for an agreement to continue serving. It will be payable at the service's discretion anywhere between 8 and 12 years in exchange for an agreement to continue serving. The rates will vary. Each service will be publishing their rates, if they have not already, for 2018 and for subsequent years. Based on criteria they establish, they will publish those in advance. The rates can fluctuate from active duty anywhere from 2.5 months pay up to 13 months pay. And for reserve component, anywhere from a half month's pay to 6 months worth of pay. And for active guard and reserve or full-time support, for the purposes of continuation pay, they would receive the active component rates as opposed to reserve component rates. And at the end of this brief, we're going to talk in a lot of detail about the lump sum, so I will leave that as well till later in the discussion. So if we could transition to the next slide on comparison of the defined benefit and the defined contribution plan.
All right, Andy, thank you. This is Stuart Kaplan from the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, the agency that manages the Thrift Savings Plan. What I wanted to do here is just give sort of a brief overview, sort of a big picture perspective on where the TSP fits into this BRS. The TSP is what's known as a defined contribution plan. It's going to supplement your other sources of income, which you can count on from a perspective of receiving your military retirement if you choose to stay long enough that you're going to get a military retirement, or other sources of income that you might have later on in retirement. And Social Security will be one of those sources. But the idea is that this plan is up to you. You're the one responsible for making the choices. And I think all of us know that we want to retire someday. And we also know that we want to have a lifestyle that supports our choices in life, to be able to do the kind of things that we want. So this plan is something that you're in control of. You determine your future. This kind of reminds me of Doc Brown in Back to the Future when he said that your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. And this is up to you. So we understand that all of you have competing financial priorities, based on, whatever your life situation is right now. But the sooner you start contributing, the more you put into the plan, the bigger and faster your account's going to grow. And what that's going to mean for you ultimately is that you're going to have more income in retirement, and that's going to be more life choices and a better lifestyle. So I'm going to turn it back over to Andy.
Thanks. Go a little bit more in depth on that comparison of defined benefit and defined contribution. We're going to talk about both of those on separate slides. So the slide you're looking at right now is how we calculate a defined benefit. You might also hear it referred to as a pension or as monthly retired pay more commonly. That is the pay you receive after serving a minimum, usually, of 20 years that continues throughout your life after that in exchange for that 20 years of service. And that's called a pension or military retired pay. How that is calculated is often somewhat mysterious to service members. We often know that it's a 50% retirement if you do 20 years, and that's calculated based on the formula you see right there. Actually, the formula, sorry, let me restate that. The current retirement system has a multiplier of 2.5%. If you take 20 years of service and multiply it by 2.5%, you get 50%. That's how we arrive at a 50% retirement after 20 years. But you can see under the blended retirement system, the multiplier is lower. It's 2% times the number of years served. So if you do 20 years, your defined benefit is going to be 40% of your pay, the high 36 average of your pay for the rest of your life. So that is a reduction in the defined benefit under the blended retirement system. But as the first bullet on the slide states, the defined benefit of the pension is still the largest component of the retirement system for those members who serve at least 20 years. One other important thing to talk about, and I think this slide demonstrates well, is how we calculate a non-regular retirement. When we say non-regular, we're referring to National Guard or Reserve members who do at least 20 qualifying years, but not necessarily 20 years of active duty. Their retirements are calculated based on their retirement points. And you can see in this example, a reservist has 4,860 retirement points. If you divide 4,860 by 360, it gives you 13.5. That means a member who has served for 4,860 days throughout their however many years has done an equivalent of 13.5 active years. Therefore, their retirement is going to be based on those 13.5 years. So you would multiply 2% times 13.5 to get their retirement multiplier, which would be 27%. So they would have a 27% retirement. Now, for non-regular retirees, the retired pay does not begin usually until age 60, although that age can be reduced for creditable service performed under certain types of orders since 2008, which is a topic that's quite complex. So advise non-regular retirees or National Guard reservists who have questions about that to either ask them here at the conclusion or to talk to a PFC or retirement service officer, because determining when you're actually going to be eligible for retired pay as a reserve or guard requires some understanding of how the laws have changed over recent years. But once you determine the years of service, meaning the multiplier, the difference between 2.5 and 2%, as I said earlier, retirement is otherwise exactly the same for service members who retire after 20 years. The difference under this plan is going to be on the defined contribution. So Mike's going to talk a little bit more detail about that now.
Great, thanks. I'm going to kick it off on the defined contribution before I turn it back over to the TSP for a little more in-depth discussion about the defined contribution. So what you're looking in front of you right now is the TSP's matching chart for automatic and matching contributions into your thrift savings plan. I'm going to break this up into two sections. I'm going to talk about those that are currently in the military that opt into the blended retirement system, and then I'll briefly talk about new accessions that join the military on or after January 1st, 2018. So if you opt into the blended retirement system, you are immediately eligible for the automatic 1% agency contribution, service contribution, and you are immediately able to start getting service matching contributions to your thrift savings plan. So if you can contribute nothing out of your basic pay, you will still get a 1% automatic contribution from your service to your thrift savings plan each pay period. Now, if you notice the chart, the more you contribute, the more your agency matches dollar for dollar or 50 cents on the dollar up to a maximum of 5%. So, for example, if I was giving 5% of my basic pay, my military service, so in this case the Air Force, would match another 5% for a total contribution that was going to my thrift savings plan of 10% for each pay period. Now, let's talk about those that join on or after January 1st, 2018. For those service members, they will be in the first 60 days, an account will be created within their name, and then they will be automatically enrolled into 3% of their basic pay into a L fund or life cycle fund, and Stuart will talk about that in just a moment, appropriate for their anticipated age of retirement. Now that applies only to new accessions on or after January 1st, 2018. It does not apply to those currently in the military that opt into the blended retirement system. Now, the automatic 1% service contribution for new accessions does not start until after 60 days of service. And then the service matching contributions don't begin until the 25th month of service, so after completion of 2 years of service. Now, we always get the question of, when is that money mine? Also known as vesting. Members are always vested in your own contributions and the service matching contributions and any of those earnings. For the automatic 1% for those that opt in to the blended retirement system, you are vested, meaning that money belongs to you after 2 years of service. That does not mean belonging to the TSP for 2 years. That does not mean after you opt into the blended retirement for 2 years. That means having 2 years of military service. So if you already have 2 years of military service when you opt into the blended retirement system, you're automatically vested. Let's say you only have a year. When you opt in, you'd have another year to wait before you're vested. Now, for those that are new accessions on or after January 1st, 2017, you're vested in that 1% automatic after 2 years of service. So when your matching contributions kick up on that 25th month of service, you are considered vested in all of the contributions, including your own contributions in your TSP at that time. So I'm going to turn it over to Stuart to talk a little bit about how those dollars are allocated and the funds that the TSP professionally manages that you are contributed to with the Thrift Savings Plan. Stuart?
All right, Major Olo, thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight the importance of making good, wise decisions about how you're going to be allocated. Now, as Major Odell said, by default, when you opt in, assuming that you're opting in for the first time, you're going to be defaulted to one of the life cycle funds. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But first of all, I want to go through the individual core funds so you can understand the purpose of those funds. And then I want to begin by putting that into context of what the overall design of the Thrift Savings Plan is. So thinking about this plan, we know that this is a pot of money that we're going to derive income from for the rest of our lives once we retire. But this is not something that we want to gamble on and take a lot of risk and just assume, well, if I make $1 million real quick, that's great. If I don't, well, that's fine too. This is not that type of investing. This is the type of investing where you want to really minimize the amount of risk so that you can do your best to guarantee the largest possible account balance so it's going to be there and available to you for as long as you live. And that is one of the things that's important. It's built into the design of the TSP. It's a long-term plan that is broadly diversified, and it's actually very simple. And the simplicity is really something that we can appreciate. So we want to be sure, no matter what we do, whether we use a life cycle fund or we choose our own individual core funds, that we do this in a rational, coherent way, so we balance risk and return so we can get the most in our account to have the kind of lifestyle that we mentioned earlier. So first of all, we've got a stable value fund, and this is the G fund. And sometimes people call this the SAFE fund, but it does have risk, and that risk is associated with inflation. But the returns of the G fund are based on a security that's unique to the TSP. That is, it's not publicly available. It's issued only to the TSP. And it has a rate of interest that's reset each and every month. And that rate is calculated based on a formula that essentially determines the average weighted yield of all U.S. Treasury notes and bonds that have maturity of 4 or more years. That may not mean a lot to some of you, but what it means is you get, like currently, a rate of about 2.25% for the month of October. And if you compare that with any other stable value fund that you might look for, or any kind of other investment that has no risk of negative returns, you're going to see that the G fund is a really significant advantage over all those other funds. The rest of the core funds that the TSP has are called index investment funds. That means that their performance is tied to and mirrors the performance of the indexes that they track. And so on your slide, you'll see above each of those boxes for the C, the F, the S, and the I is the index that those funds are tracking. So the F fund is made up of about 10,000 different bonds. They're very highly rated. Most of them are AAA. You got corporate bonds, and you've got government bonds in there. So this is a fund that doesn't have a lot of volatility, but in some years, you know, it doesn't perform as well as other years. Some years it does pretty well, but it's not going to be as volatile as the stock funds. The stock funds are the C, the S, and the I. The C is something you probably are familiar with if you ever see anything on TV about the stock market. They're always going to mention the S&P 500. And the C fund is made up of the 500 most widely traded stocks, which are in the S&P 500. And so whatever the S&P 500 does, that's what your C fund is going to do. So this is broadly diversified among these large companies. It makes up about 80% of the U.S. stock market. The S fund is the rest of the U.S. stock market. It is virtually every other publicly traded company except for the really small, sort of what we might call the penny stock companies. So between the C and the S, you're diversified among all sectors of the economy, large companies, medium-sized, small companies, companies that are considered growth, value, all those Morningstar categories. So you're broadly diversified without having any overlaps between those two funds or any gaps because you don't have, you know, a publicly traded company in one or the other. Then the I fund, we go outside the U.S. borders, and this is made up of about a little over 900 companies in about 20 different countries. Most of those, or all of those, are in the developed world. Most of the I fund, I guess, well, not most of it, but 42% is between the countries of Great Britain and Japan. But these are very large companies, and it's broadly diversified to try to mitigate the risk that of an investor just having all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. Now I'm going to go to the next slide, and you'll see that we have 5 circles listed there, and they each have a date above them. And those dates correspond roughly with the time at which you're planning to retire. Now, you're not locked into this if you want to choose and do something a little bit different, but what you'll see is the colors represent the funds that we just went over. And you'll see, for example, let's just start with the L2050 fund at the top left. You'll see that most of it is green, so that corresponds with the C fund. And then you've got about 15% is the blue, that's the S fund. So these stocks are going to have more potential for growth, but yet they have more potential for downside risk as well. But if you have a long time horizon, you're retiring around 2046 to 2054 in that time frame, you can afford sort of the ups and downs of the market and without suffering too much because you've got the time to recover. Well, if your time frame is a little bit shorter, you might be defaulted into, or you might choose the L2040 fund, and you'll notice that it gradually dials down the risk by having less of that investment in stocks, a little bit more in bonds, and a little bit more in the G fund. And so these targets are 10 years apart, and you'll see you can choose to make a change. If you're defaulted, or if you're just already contributing to TSP, your contribution allocation is going to continue, but you can still make a change. But this is a very important part of what we talked about, the defined contribution plan, is making a good, coherent choice about how you're allocated so that you're not taking too much risk, but you're taking enough risk so you balance that risk and return ratio for what's right for you. Let's move on to the next slide, and this drills in a little bit deeper as to what the purpose of life cycle funds are. And it shows you a little chart called the efficient frontier. And this we took out of our booklet, which is the TSP fund information sheets. You can download this from our website. But what this is showing is that on the horizontal axis, that's a measure of risk. And so the longer my time horizon, the more risk I can afford to take. And so we look back over to the left, we see the expected return. Now, these funds were put together by a investment consultant that did a lot of research and a lot of math based on historical returns and all kinds of data to try to determine what is the best mix to get the most return. So even though we don't know the future, this is what they put together in their modeling to determine you might take the most amount of risk with the 2050 fund. I'm going to get the most amount of return because I got the time for those funds to grow. But as I get older, as I get closer to my retirement time horizon, I'm dialing down the risk, and the trade-off is that I can expect a little less return for that change in how I'm allocated.
Hey, Stuart, this is Major Odell. Let me just quickly throw out there. The L funds are really good for those folks that don't have the time, experience, or understanding on how to manage their thrift savings plan. We hear a lot of service members put their accounts on autopilot, and for those of you that are not familiar with a professionally managed account like this, based on your time horizon, it'll get conservative the closer you get to your retirement, right, Stuart? And
exactly.
So it helps manage your account. So this is really a good option for those of you, again, as I mentioned, time, experience, and understanding of how the thrift savings plan works, may want to look at these particular options.
Right, and I just want to add to that, this, like Major Odell said, this is a great place to start. That's why, if you're under the auto enrollment and you're going to be opted in, you can just stay there, at least in the beginning. You may decide at some point you want to make some adjustments. And the life cycle funds are a great place to start because maybe you want to take a little more risk, maybe not so much risk, maybe you want to do something a little bit different. You can use that as a basis. Now, we're going to go to the next slide. We're going to talk about contribution allocation defaults, which we've already sort of alluded to here a little bit. But I think you can see there that if you choose to opt into the blended system and you have not participated in the thrift savings plan up to this point, you've not made any contributions, you will be enrolled by default into the age-appropriate L fund. And basically, I think I went over that, but like, for example, if it's going to be based on when you turn age 62. If you turn 62 between 2046 and 2054, you're going to be defaulted to the L2050 fund. And so you can just kind of extrapolate from that, what ages would be appropriate for the other funds. But if you're currently contributing to the TSP or have contributed in the past, maybe you've discontinued your contributions, for you, your contribution allocation will continue. And what that means is whatever you've set up with a TSP previously, or maybe you didn't set anything up and you were just defaulted to the G fund, that will continue for you. So perhaps that's something you want to make sure that you look at, because if you didn't go into the TSP website when you made your contribution before, you're defaulted to the G fund, and that's the risk-free fund that I mentioned earlier. For folks that perhaps, there's not many of those folks listening on the line, but for folks coming into the service after January 1st, 2018, they will be defaulted to the age-appropriate L fund, like we just talked about. And then for folks that choose not to opt into BRS, that is, they're going to remain under the Legacy High 3 plan, their contribution allocation will just continue into whatever they've, well, if they choose to contribute, I should say rather, they're going to be defaulted to the G fund. So they're not going to be automatically enrolled because they're not part of the BRS. So they choose not to do that. And the last thing I wanted to say is that, again, you can change your contribution allocation at any time, and the place where you do that is on tsp.gov, not on your agency's payroll website, which for most of you is going to be MyPay. So that's why it's important for you, once you get the letter from the TSP with your temporary password, that you use that to log into the tsp.gov website, establish your account, and that's where you can make those transactions. Now, the last slide that I want to talk about is the one that says Blended Retirement System Resources. So the tsp.gov website is a wealth of information, and the information that's on the tsp.gov website is accurate and it's current. And this may not be what you'll find if you look for TSP information outside of the tsp.gov website. We've got a couple of things out there I think that you might want to take a look at if you're interested in more information. And one is under Forms and Publications. And the easiest place to find that is if you look at the kind of the top right-hand corner of the tsp.gov homepage, you'll see where it says Forms and Publications. You can click on that, and then you'll find a list of publications. It's pretty easy to find. But in fact, if you've got the slides, you've got the link there. But this is a fact sheet that's questions and answers about opting into the blended retirement system. And it's about 5 or 6 pages, and it goes over all these highlights that we've been talking about today. And then the one other resource I wanted to mention is on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube4Gov, and you can easily get to that from our homepage as well. You'll see a little icon for YouTube. If you click on that, and then there's also the link on the slide, but this is a short video. It's about 3 minutes, and it gives you kind of the 40,000-foot view of all the essentials of TSP under BRS. And while you're out there at YouTube, you'll find a lot of other videos that provide some excellent resources for information about whether to opt into, choose traditional versus Roth, a little bit more about the funds, and many other things.
Wonderful. Thanks, Stuart. So we're going to move on to contribution limits. And for everyone on the phone, I want people to recognize that when you are contributing into the Thrift Savings Plan out of your basic pay, there is an annual cap that is set annually by the IRS. So for 2017, that amount is $18,000. So while you're able to contribute other items or other types of money into your account, such as incentive pay, we'll talk about continuation pay in a moment, you can't hit that $18,000 cap. Should you hit that cap early, you could potentially lose out on matching contributions from your service. So that number is important to note. It does change if you are in a deployed environment or a supporting a deployed environment. We're not going to get in that today, but if you are heading into a deployed environment, you do want to pay special attention to that other contribution limit. But I bring this up specifically now talking to our National Guard and Reserve folks, that for many of you in the National Guard and Reserve, you have a full-time civilian job and you have your reserve duty job. Some of you may have accounts that are similar to the TSP or a 401k type style in which you get automatic and matching contributions. I bring this up specifically for you to understand that $18,000 cap applies to both of your accounts, your civilian and your military TSP. That combined, you cannot go over that $18,000 cap. Now, if you think you're going to be contributing that much amount of money to your account in totality each year, I highly encourage you to visit your installation's personal financial counselor or financial manager, or contact the Military One Source phone number and ask to talk to a financial counselor to talk a little bit more about the implications regarding taxes. But I did want to just flag that for everyone. So let me turn it over now to Mr. Corso, and we'll talk a little more about continuation pay.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Earlier in the conversation, I mentioned continuation pay. Continuation pay is a mid-career bonus paid to members covered by the blended retirement system who agree to additional service. Because there's a change in the actual multiplier for retirement after 20 years, the concern or the sense was that a slightly lower defined benefit might be less attractive to some service members. Generally, in the mid-career point is when we as service members are deciding whether we're going to continue with our current enlistment or we're going to make a full career out of the military at that, say, 8, 10, 12-year point. The thought process or concern was that a slightly lower defined benefit might be less of incentive to certain people to continue serving for that full 20-year career. And we want to counteract that as much as possible because we do not want to in any way diminish the desire for people to serve for a full career if they're so inclined. Continuation pay is meant to counteract that as an incentive to keep people serving. It's payable anywhere between 8 and 12 years, and your services will make that determination. They'll also make the determination on the rates. There's a wide range of what those rates could be, anywhere from 2.5 months pay to 13 months pay for active duty members in AGR and FTS, or a half month's pay to 6 months pay for our Reserve and National Guard members. The services will decide on those rates. They may be career-based or skills-based, and they'll decide on the point in the career where they're payable. And those will be published each year by services. A couple notes about continuation pay, in particular for 2018. In most cases, for members who are eligible to opt into blended retirement, they need to be sure they understand their services rules on when continuation pay is payable to ensure that they're able to receive the continuation pay if they're in that window. And I'm particularly talking about those who are rapidly approaching the 12-year point. They may be eligible to opt into blended retirement because they have less than 12 years as of December 31st, 2017, but they'll actually go over 12 years of service during 2018. While their option to opt into the blended retirement system continues throughout the entire year, their ability to receive continuation pay ends once they hit 12 years. So people who fall into that window will need to have made the opt-in decision prior to hitting 12 years. That's something that we couldn't do enough justice talking about it here, but it's something that if you or somebody you know is falling into that window where you're approaching 12 years of service and you're considering BRS, make sure you understand the implications for continuation pay. Continuation pay is a bonus that can be invested in TSP, although as Mike mentioned earlier, there is an impact on how much you can invest annually into TSP and 401k that you need to be cautious of.
Now, I like to do examples, so we're going to advance to the next slide. And here's an example pay chart for 2017. If you would go ahead and advance the next one for me here. Notice if you go down on the left-hand side, we're going to take a look at an E7 at approaching 12 years. Go ahead and hit the next one for me. You'll notice I'll go to the top of this slide, and it'll be at the over 12 mark. I'm using the Army's current published rate of continuation pay, which is 2.5% for active component and 0.5% for reserve component at 12 years of service. If you'd advance the next slide for me, we'll go down in the chart down here and notice that that amount is $4,088.70. So go ahead and advance it for me until you see the screen pop up. One more. And there we go. So if we take a look at this particular example, and I decided to opt into the blended retirement system, and this happened to be where I fell in terms of my rank, for continuation pay at the Army's current rate, if as an active component or active duty service member in E7, I would get that $4,088 times 2.5. So my continuation pay for accepting a continued obligated service of 4 additional years would be $10,222 approximately. For a reserve component, let's say I was Army National Guard, mine would be at 0.5 at that same year mark at 12 years of service, so I'd get $2,044 for 4 years of obligated service. Now, as I mentioned, we're still waiting for a few of the other services, but the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps have published their rates. You can always go to the Blended Retirement System webpage, which we'll show you later on, to be able to find the individual service resource pages about blended retirement and look for your particular services continuation pay rates. So with that, let's talk about lump sum.
The last major component of BRS is lump sum. And in the interest of time, there's unfortunately no way I can do justice to as complex or complicated a topic as how lump sum payments are calculated in this form, but I'm going to try to talk really quickly about lump sum and see if there are questions at the end. The lump sum is a new option for service members exclusive to the blended retirement system. It provides choices at retirement. 90 days prior to retiring, a service member may choose to receive either a 25% or 50% of the discounted present value of their future retirement benefit. That percentage is calculated from the date they retire until they reach full Social Security retirement age, which for most of us will be age 67. It can vary depending on your birth date, but for almost all service members, it's age 67. This lump sum is then paid out 60 days after retirement in exchange for a reduction in the member's monthly retired pay. So if they took a 50% lump sum, they would receive a discounted portion of their retired pay from retirement to age 67 that is 50% of their retired pay. And then in exchange, their monthly retired pay would only be 50% of what it otherwise would have been until they reach age 67. The amount of the lump sum is based on a discount rate that's published by the Department of Defense annually for the subsequent year. The rate set for 2018 is 6.99%. And that will be published every year at approximately June 1st, so that members who are planning to retire the following year will know what it is. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. We'll just show really quickly how the lump sum works. If you could click through that, Mike, we see that in the upper half of the screen, we're looking at a member's career, and this member has served for 20 years, and those are represented by the green bars. And then at retirement, you can see their retired pay begins immediately. The blue bars represent what their retired pay would be based on the blended retirement system. And this member has not elected a lump sum, so they're receiving their full retired pay. But if you go to the next click, you see this member is electing a lump sum. So what's in the red dotted lines at the top is the 50% of his or her retirement pay from retirement to age 67. And that goes into the large money bag you see off to the left. That money bag has been discounted to its present value using the published discount rate of 6.99%, resulting in a slightly lower money bag you see below in the lower half of the screen. That money bag represents the lump sum. So that's a 50% lump sum that's been reduced by the published discount rate of 6.99%. But this member also continues to receive retired pay. So they'll still get a monthly retired paycheck beginning the month following retirement, but that retired pay is only going to be half of what it otherwise would have been until age 67, when it reverts back to its full amount as if the member hadn't taken a lump sum. So what they're basically doing is electing to forego half of their retired pay. In this person's case, I believe it's for 25 years, in exchange for a lump sum at retirement. And these lump sum amounts can be rather substantial. So this could be an interesting option for many service members, but it's one that there are a number of caveats and issues that have to be considered. So it's important to consult with a professional prior to electing. The next screen will show us a non-regular retiree, and that's a reserve or guard who ends their service, but then goes into what we call the gray area, which is a period of time between when they conclude their service before they become eligible to receive retired pay, which is normally at age 60. So otherwise, the way the lump sum is calculated is the same. It's just a reserve or National Guard member has to wait until they are eligible to begin receiving retired pay. In this case, the example shows at age 60, then they can make a lump sum election. Their lump sum covers the years from age 60 to 67. So they have 7 years of reduced retired pay in exchange for that lump sum. There's a couple of considerations with lump sum that also need to be taken into account in addition to the financial issues. Those members who might be eligible for VA disability payments need to understand that the special rules regarding the offset of military retired pay and VA disability payments, that could impact how much they receive in VA disability pay if they take retired pay as a lump sum up front. Additionally, with a survivor benefit plan, a member who elects a lump sum still has the option of participating in survivor benefit plan, just like every other retiree, which is a plan that allows you to cover your dependents in the event of your death so they continue to receive a portion of your retired pay. Those members can continue to participate in SBP, but their premiums will be based on what their retired pay would have been had they not taken the lump sum. So they're going to be paying the full rate and covering the full amount of their retired pay for any potential beneficiaries. And both the VA disability and SBP are complex programs. So again, those are areas where members who are interested in lump sum will need to talk to a professional financial counselor.
Now, we're hoping that most of you on the call today have already taken the mandatory BRS opt-in course. If you have not, it is required before you are able to opt into the blended retirement system come January 1st, 2018. I'm going to talk about 4 options for completing that course and getting credit. You most certainly can go to Joint Knowledge Online, or JKO. You will require a CAC or ID card to be able to log in to complete the course, which is approximately 2 hours long. It'll go into more depth of what we've been sharing with you today. And it'll automatically register your certificate for completion of this course. You may also enter or complete the course via your services learning management system. So, for example, Marine Online or ADLS for the Air Force, you can complete it that way and get credit logging on with a CAC card. You also may go to Military OneSource, and this is particularly useful for those in the National Guard or Reserve that may be geographically separated from their units, may not drill regularly, say once a month, or for anyone that would like to take the training course with their significant other, such as a spouse or a parent. You can go to Military OneSource and go to the Blended Retirement System page and click on the non-CAC enabled JKO course. You'll be able to complete the course. It is the exact same course, but at the end, please make sure to print off your certificate, and you will need to turn that into your training manager to get credit for completing the course. And then finally, some installations, primarily larger installations, are offering the 2-hour course via Facilitator and Facilitator Guide and DVD, and you complete the course there if that has been established on your particular installation. Let's go to the next slide here and talk just a little bit about timeline.
I think everybody on the call knows that the blended retirement system is going into effect on January 1st, approximately 74 days from now. So you see that on the implementation timeline, all updates to systems and policy and training are all in converging on that point, January 1st. After January 1st, everybody who enters the service will be automatically covered under blended retirement. We didn't talk about it in this webinar, but we're also going to be releasing a new course specifically geared toward those members who join after January, who are automatically covered under blended retirement. And that will go into a lot of detail for them on how to take advantage of TSP throughout their career.
So let's say you've decided that the blended retirement system is the system for you. I'm not saying that that's the decision you've made right now, but let's go to the next slide. And I think it's important to share with you all, where would you go come January 1st, 2018? If you are in the Army, Navy, or Air Force, you will utilize MyPay to opt into the blended retirement system. Now, again, that is after you've completed the mandatory BRS opt-in course online. For the Marine Corps, you'll go to MOL. For the Public Health Service, you'll go and contact your regional compensation branch. And if you're in the U.S. Coast Guard or the NOAA Corps, you'll utilize a direct access to opt into the blended retirement system.
One remaining tool we want to talk about that's important for anybody making the decision on whether or not to opt in is the online comparison calculator. The website address is on the screen. We highly encourage anybody who is eligible to use this tool to compare your benefits under the legacy system with the blended retirement system. It will give you an individualized calculation of your estimated retirement benefits. There are 12 different fields you can adjust based on your own circumstances to see varying different types of outputs. It'll also help you estimate what lump sum you might be entitled to. This is a nearly essential tool for anybody who is considering whether or not they're going to opt in.
Right. And just 2 last things I want to share with you before we open it up for questions. On this slide here, you'll see 2 web addresses. One is for the Blended Retirement System resource page. It is your comprehensive single resource on the Blended Retirement System. It'll also provide links to individual service and component resource pages, have they been established. You can find information for posters if you happen to be a PFC or PFM on the call right now, or a family planner if you need resources locally, but it also gives service members information on frequently asked questions, other websites, and of course our video series, Fact or Fiction, tackling 24 topics identified by service members about the new retirement system. And of course, Military OneSource for accessing the online training without needing a CAC. Finally, today you're participating in one of our events during National Save for Retirement Week, and we appreciate your participation. Tomorrow, if we're not able to get to all of the questions today, I encourage you to go ahead to our Facebook event for tomorrow on Military OneSource. If you go to Facebook and click on events, you'll be able to register for tomorrow. You can go ahead and post your question there now, and our BRS guru, Ask Robin, will be answering those tomorrow between 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The Thrift Savings Plan will be joining us, as well as members from Military OneSource. So Stan, let's go ahead and turn it over to you and open up the questions for the remaining time we have. We'll answer as many as we can.
All right, thank you. The first question reads, for continuation pay, how is it determined who qualifies for the 2.5 base pay and who qualifies for the 13 base pay? Seems like a big difference.
It is a big difference, and it'll be up to the services to publish those rates as appropriate. So each year, the services will make a determination on who would be eligible for which rate. So far, I believe the Navy and the Marine Corps have published their rates for calendar year 2018. The Army and the Air Force should be publishing them soon. I would direct anybody with that question to their services, and each of the services have a blended retirement system website or resource page that is also linked on our DoD resource webpage that has more specific information on continuation pay rates.
Thank you. Next question. Can you go back to the Coast Guard members and address where they go to get their points?
That is a great question. I don't believe I have Coast Guard Reserve information here, but what I can do is I will update this particular slide with the information, and I will also make sure that it gets included on the BRS resource webpage for the Coast Guard on where you would access, if you're in the Coast Guard Reserve, your retirement page, your retirement points.
Okay. Next question. How is base pay calculated for RC members?
Well, reserve, that's actually an extremely complicated question because it varies for each individual member. But just like active duty members, it's based on a high 36 average. But it's not the high 36 average of that individual. It's the high 36 or the 36 highest months of pay that the member immediately precedes when the member is eligible for retired pay. It is a complex calculation, which is one of the great aspects of our BRS comparison calculator, is that it will do that calculation, or at least estimate that calculation for reserve members who may not be eligible for retired pay for 10, 20, 30 years down the road. It's very difficult to determine or estimate what your retired pay is going to be because it's predicated on the future increases to basic pay even after you've stopped serving. So the calculator does a approximation for that for members, but the bottom line is it's based on the 36 months immediately preceding when the member is eligible to receive retired pay, what a person of that rank and grade would receive on active duty.
Okay. Next question reads, so for your BRS system basic slide, you had 2% times YOS times high 36 average of base pay. Is my high 36-month average of base pay higher from when I was in active duty as Lieutenant Colonel, or is it higher as a Lieutenant Colonel in the A&G? What about if I'm full Colonel in A&G?
Well, if you're a full Colonel in the Air National Guard, it really depends on what type of retirement you receive, not what you received while you were on active duty. A regular retiree is going to be based on, meaning you have an active retirement or you retire off of active duty with 20 years of active service. That's going to be based on your highest 36 months of pay, regardless of when those were in your career. Almost always those are the last 36 months, but it's the highest 36 months of pay. But if you receive a reserve retirement, which is really called a non-regular retirement, it's based on what a person of your rank and grade would receive in the 36 months preceding when you become eligible to receive retired pay. So if you're a colonel in the Air National Guard and there's going to be some period between when you stop serving and when you receive retired pay, your retired pay is going to be calculated based on what a colonel in the military of that number of years of service would receive in those 3 years prior to when you're eligible to receive retired pay.
Okay, thank you. Next question reads, so the max matching contribution is 5%, which requires individual contribution of at least 5%, correct?
Well, this is Stuart Kaplan from the TSP. The match, like Major Odell said, is based on the formula of dollar for dollar for the first 3% of your pay that you contribute, and then 50 cents on the dollar for the next 2%. So therefore, if a service member contributes 5% of their pay, they actually get a 4% match. And the other 1% comes in because that's the agency or the DoD automatic contribution. So we add that 1% to the 4%, and that gets us to 5%.
Okay, I'm going to take a few more questions. We are at the top of the hour, and I want to respect everyone's time. It was allotted for an hour. So the next question reads, for a BRS member, if my PEBD is date 3/2/18, when would my 1% agency and 3% auto contribution start? May 1st, 2018 or June 1st, 2018?
Again, that's a complex question because your eligibility for BRS is determined by your deems date, which is date of initial entry into military service, not pay entry base date. So if this member had a deems date prior to December 31st, 2017, that makes them an opt-in eligible member. If they don't actually come on to active duty until March 2nd, 2018, that's their pay entry base date, they would have the option of opting into the BRS. And if they opt into BRS, their matching and automatic contributions would begin immediately. But if you're saying that the member didn't join the service or didn't sign a contract until on or after January 1st, and they have a pay entry base date of March 2nd, then they're under the category of new accessions. So they have to wait 60 days to begin receiving that 1% automatic contribution, which off the top of my head would be sometime in very early May. But again, the rules are really based on whether the member is opt-in eligible or not.
Okay, I'm going to take two more questions. I'm going to read two more questions. Will the National Guard members follow continuation pay for either Army or Air Force, depending which upon which one they are a part of?
Great. So for the National Guard and Reserve, continuation pay is based on years and not based on retirement points. For the Army National Guard, you will fall under the continuation pay chart issued by the Army. And for the Air National Guard, you will fall under the continuation pay chart issued for the U.S. Air Force.
Okay, and the last question I'm going to read, just for clarification, members still in legacy system and have made contributions to TSP, their contributions will be shifted to the G fund, correct?
Their contribution allocation will continue as it was prior to them opting in.
Okay. At this time, I'm not going to take any more questions, but if you would like to submit a follow-up question, submit a question that wasn't allowed to be read at this time, please email moswebinars@militaryOneSource.com, and I'll send the questions over to the presenter. And you can always go to militaryonesource.mil to find other information. And I would like to thank Major Odell, Andrew Corso, and Stuart Chaplin for sharing their invaluable experience and expertise. And of course, as always, these aren't possible without our attendees. So thank you for attending and participating in today's webinar. At this time, this concludes the webinar on Introduction to the Blended Retirement System. Thank you all and have a great day. Yes.
Dan, real quick, if I'm still on, Military OneSource, we appreciate your support and hosting today's webinar. Don't forget, Military OneSource is hosting on their Facebook platform tomorrow a Q&A session specifically about blended retirement. So you may also submit your questions on Military OneSource Facebook under the event section for tomorrow's webinar, and we'll get to answering those tomorrow between 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So we hope to see you there. And thanks again, Military OneSource, for hosting today.
Thank you.